One-on-One. My name is Jim Worthen. Underneath us during the show, you'll see where you can see it on the internet, when it plays on Channel 17, Santa Barbara, Cox Cable. And the reason to give you that information is so you can pass it on. Because the odds of people seeing the first show, probably a few hundred people, but by the time it goes on the internet, the guesstimate is 3,000 to 5,000 people, and repeats. We've changed the format some in the last few months, and I used to start every show with, where were you born, what were your parents like, blah, blah, blah. Turns out that if I don't do that, that works into the discussion with the guests. They talk about their mom and dad, they talk about siblings, they talk about schools, but it's more natural than the way I did it for 25 years, I guess. Old dogs either learn new tricks or they get run over by a car, and we're going to talk about that today. My guest today is Jim Williams. Oh wait, you're his...
No, he's my uncle.
Yeah, you're his nephew, Jim Williams.
Rumor has it.
Yeah, old radio and friend, and a great author of Western books, Jim Williams. I think he's still doing some radio down on a Saturday in Ventura that goes down to...
Occasionally, I think so, but he writes under the pseudonym Big Jim Williams.
Jim Williams.
Yeah, so he's out there.
That's a pseudonym? That's what I always called him.
Yeah.
I heard you speak. We've met several times, in fact, sat next to each other at dinner a couple of times, but I heard you speak at a function out in Goleta, and I asked you to come on the show, and you were going to talk about for 58 minutes and 30 seconds, and I said just what you told that audience of 40 or 50 people. Your expertise in traffic, cars, planning of traffic patterns as consultant all over the country, right?
Well, primarily in California, but yeah.
You don't go anywhere else?
Well, I do in my other life, but no, I stay pretty much centric to California on this. Okay. There's too much to know.
It's, I may get to it, but we won't focus on putting up those concrete barriers along State Street because they don't want cars to come up into the people eating outside,
right.
And the moving of parades to other areas than we were used to for years in Santa Barbara. We won't get to that. Maybe.
No.
Maybe.
That's somebody else's world.
How did you get first? You were Mike in the morning for years doing traffic on News Press Radio 1290. But how did you originally get started as a young person, an interest in the automobile and more than that in the way it was used?
Well, back when I was still in college, I was through the Administration of Justice program at Santa Ana Community College, Santa Ana JC at the time. Part of one of the programs, we had to do papers, as we do in all classes, and they had us do ride-alongs, and mine happened to be with the Highway Patrol, which is unusual because the Highway Patrol to this day does not have ride-alongs. So I had an opportunity there, and this is down in Orange County, Santa Ana office. And our duty, or project, I guess, was to go out and report back on what occurred and what our feelings were about that and whatever. And so there I was, riding around with a guy on the PM shift from the Santa Ana office, and they get a call of a fatal traffic accident up at the 91 freeway in the southbound 5. Now, we were up in Silverado Canyon at the time, so this is a bit of a drive to get over there.
I've never heard of somebody getting real crime or death on a ride-along. They usually dump you.
Well, no, but see, this was part of the school. This was all a thing. So you go where they go, and you do what you got to do. And so we get up there, and this was 4 people killed in this particular accident, plus some additional injuries. Now, back in 1970, what is it, 77, the 91 and the 5 was completely different than it is today. This is just south of the KFI tower, kind of orientation to that, just outside of Buena Park. And a car coming southbound had hit the center divider, and it was a station wagon. This is why I get so passionate about this stuff, is because I can remember it as if it just happened on the way over here to the studio. You cannot get this stuff out of your head. And that's part of what I try to convey to people, is how fast this stuff happens and how it sticks with you forever. But nonetheless, this guy's drunk. He and his passenger in a station wagon. They hit the center divider, which at the time was your standard guardrail type configuration. Hits the guardrail, overturns, cuts a VW Bug, which is going northbound, in half, literally cuts it in half, lands upside down. So those 2 folks are deceased in their vehicle. The Volkswagen, it kills the driver of the car, but it continues on down the freeway until it rear ends another car. And the baby that was in the right front seat was ejected all the way across the freeway and landed in the ice plant, back when we had ice plant on the freeways. And my job as the student who was taking a report was to stand at the body of the poor child, who was maybe 2 years old, 2.5, something like that. Stand
Not
there.
the baby, that's another infant.
Yeah, there's an infant that was killed. And stand there and don't let anybody get to it until the coroner could arrive, because there weren't enough highway patrol there to deal with it. And we're talking 5 o'clock at night, so the traffic is just crazy. Anyway, long story short, I went back and gave my report. But that had a huge impression upon me about how things changed so fast. Because part of that story is that the father of the wife and the kid was going down and recognized the car. Not a lot of yellow VW Bugs running around in 1977. And he stops in the middle of the freeway and gets out and goes absolutely ballistic, as you would expect. And so now we have to restrain this guy out in the middle of the freeway. And I'm just a student. I don't know anything about anything. I'm watching this all unfold, 5:30 in the afternoon on the southbound Santa Ana freeway. And, it's tragedy out there. And the look on that kid's face is something that I'll never get out of my head. Fast forward through my whole career, as a police officer, you go to lots of traffic accidents, a variety of, and it sticks with you. I could tell stories until we run out of tape. Well, we don't use tape anymore, but
I expect you to, please.
yeah, but I remember one night over on Sunset Boulevard up by UCLA. Sunset and Westwood is a sharp banking curve. You're probably familiar with it from your LA days. 2 fatal traffic accidents at the same night in the same intersection.
But hours apart.
Hours apart, both at night, and there's a stone wall on the northeast corner of that intersection, or southeast corner of the intersection, and it says UCLA on it. And that wall has eaten a lot of cars. And there's a couple others. And there was a motorcycle accident in front of probably 2,500, 3,000 people one night on Gailey, which goes right down along the frontage of the frat houses there. And that guy hit a car so hard his hair was implanted in the pores of the tire. 3 cars caught on fire. He was deceased, and his partner was left a quarter mile back up the road, had fallen off. He dies. If you're going to do trauma to yourself, at least do it near a trauma center like UCLA, because they really tried to save that kid. But these things stick with you. And so we fast forward to doing Mike in the Morning, for example, and we're talking about traffic. And I'm trying to relay, without being crazy about it, the reality of traffic collisions for the cops and the firemen and the paramedics and the tow truck drivers. They get into this, and the emergency room nurses and the techs and all the people that are involved in the process. It's the part you don't see on TV. It's the part that doesn't get told in the story. It's the part that people really need to see and understand to appreciate the magnitude of what 70 miles an hour at 102 feet per second can do to you. and that the physics class in high school probably does in fact mean something when you're driving a car. And so for 10 years I taught for the National Traffic Safety Institute. They're still around. We taught not only, I call them bad boy classes, you know, when you get your ticket in King City for 70. Now you can blow through, well, you can't because of the construction, but 70 miles an hour is posted speed limit in there now. But at the time it wasn't. But we also did commercial driving instruction, risk management for insurance companies and self-insured that had drivers, a lot of companies here in Santa Barbara. So, I mean, you really get out there and in the streets with how people drive and what they're thinking about, what they're not doing. The cell phone became a big component of that years later. But over time, you begin to realize that, you know, risk management as it relates to the operation of a vehicle is a big deal. And maybe I could exchange some of that in the radio program, because it was my company that was doing the program. So, I mean, I had the contract to do it. Then my idea was to use that 3-hour time block as a training opportunity. Now we had fun and we did other things, tried to anyway. But that was the objective, and a lot of it centered around crime prevention, accident prevention, driver safety, and things like that. And it's one of the reasons I got so into traffic. I personally didn't care about what the traffic was doing on the freeway, because the only way to get to Ventura and Los Angeles is the 101, whether it's blocked or not. So what difference does it make? But I quickly realized that a lot of people do care, and it would be foolish of me not to acknowledge that. And over 2.5 years, the listenership I had was more in Ventura and Los Angeles, courtesy of the cell phone, than we had in Santa Barbara, because I was doing traffic all the way down into the greater Los Angeles area within reason. And I got criticized at first, and I said, well, don't you understand? People up at 4:30, 5 o'clock in the morning, they're going to work, and work is in Ventura and Los Angeles, not here in Santa Barbara, or they're coming back from work. I've been a commuter all my life, so I'm very sympathetic to that. And so I was doing reports on PCH all the way down to the Interstate 10, down to Lincoln. One of my listeners was Santa Barbara Airbus. They were using it for their bus routes and the people that were going down there, to whether or not we're going to go down PCH or we're going to take the 101. At least somebody's paying attention to that. And with Quick Maps, you now get pretty much live on the spot reporting as what traffic flow is, because it's based on various elements, cell phones being one of them. So, I mean, with some degree of accuracy, you could tell people it's going to be a good day, it's going to be a bad day. But the side effect of that, and how I got involved with Scott Wentz and their group and stuff, was I was beginning to see patterns of how traffic was moving. Now, I already knew about traffic patterns, because in the police department, when you take traffic accident reports, the reports, part of it goes over to the traffic department at the city or in the county, and then over at CHP, there it goes to Caltrans. And the idea is, what are the proximate causes of traffic accidents? Are there things that we can change? Are we seeing patterns of time of day, violations, that kind of thing? And is there anything we can do to fix it? And so I was aware that that was going on. I know when I worked at the city, the idea is if we started seeing a lot of unsafe turning movements, or people making unsafe left turns on red lights, that kind of thing, then they would throw the traffic cars in there and they'd just start writing tickets. And all of a sudden you're accident. So there was cause and effect.
Maximum enforcement.
Yeah, so if you had a speeding problem in a school zone, for example, and you started having accidents, you start, okay, well, we know between this time and this time is a good time to be down there with radar and shoot some tickets. Most of the stuff was turning movements, unsafe left turns, going over double yellow lines, that kind of thing was really prevalent down in the Irvine area on MacArthur. Now, this was back when Irvine didn't look like Disneyland. So, I mean, there were still orange trees down there. But still, I'm kind of a long-winded answer to your question, but it all kind of plugged together at 4:30 in the morning when I was looking at the screen. I'm thinking, what's this telling me that would be of interest? Hence the idea of the dog leg up there at Upper State Street and down at Alomar, and then the box down here off of Haley in that area. And then I would actually sometimes go down and see what it was that was causing the problem. Because right down there at the city yards, the traffic is jammed up right down there where Rose's Cafe and all those places are. What in the world's going on down here and why? And what impact is that having on our community, whether it be for the business or trying to get to work, or the buses trying to get in and out of the zone, or city vehicles trying to get in and out of city yards. I mean, it starts getting kind of complex. And having worked in a city and a county for that matter, I know how important the city yard, the motor pool yards are, because you got to get in and out, get your gas, there's shift change, there's all these things that go on. The county, Santa Barbara Counties, is up at the dump. So, I mean, they're kind of off the beaten path a little bit for now, but that's going to change too when they put in the new communications center and that whole county area up there starts to further develop. That's going to become a big deal. But I hope I answered your question there. I kind of rambled a bit.
No, I want you to, because you have so much information, but I'll take you back to the young man standing next to the dead child on the freeway. You're in college, you're going to write a report. Where did that take you from doing that and being in college and writing the report?
Well, ironically, my law enforcement career had very little to do with traffic. I mean, if you're a uniformed patrol cop, you're out stopping cars and stuff, but that's not traffic enforcement, not to the extent that we're talking about. But after ultimately I retired out of early at Foot Patrol, and I went straight to Northwestern University and went through the Northwestern Traffic Safety Institute's program for accident investigation and reconstruction. Back in the late 80s, accident reconstruction and auto accident was big business. And I had already been recruited, and I had already started my own business way back just after the Olympics. So I said, well, let's get into the self-insured aspect of this, so that you're talking about construction companies, city, municipal governments, things like this that need investigations done that by third parties, and that's kind of where it all took off from Northwestern and a variety of different other classes and programs that I went to. And then I was also teaching for the Traffic Safety Institute, and so with that...
Where is it?
They're based out of San Jose, but they teach all over California. And with that, I was beginning to get involved in accident stuff, because self-insureds were then having to take their people that had been involved in accidents and do remedial training. Well, who's going to do that? And so you start talking to these folks. Okay, well, how did you get into this accident, or what were you doing, or whatever? Having come from the surveillance world for many years, I got very accustomed to watching people and listening to people and talking to people, and that's really where the root and the meat of all of this is.
So you didn't just take a written report on what the person said they did. You wanted to look them in the eye and, oh, my cell phone was off, and you finally find out that it was on the seat next to them, and they were...
Well, and people will lie. I know this is a surprise to you, but they'll say I wasn't on the phone, and yet those records are immediately available. Oh. There's no way that you can tell them that you weren't on the phone when they can go and find it out. The thing is common is you're a cop and you're driving down the street and you get the radio call, the traffic accident, State and Haley or whatever, and you show up and you get the first thing you do is make sure everybody's okay and identified, and then you get your license, registration, proof of insurance, and you get your vehicles marked and do all this stuff as quickly as you can so you can stabilize the scene. And then you ask, and at some point you're going to do your interview. What happened? Tell me what happened. Well, more often than not, this has been enough time here where people who have no clue what happened, because it happened before their brain was even aware that it occurred, are now putting together the facts based on what they're seeing in front of them. But what they see in front of them
So they're not making it up, they're trying to figure out.
Yeah, they're not lying. Well, in some cases they are, but for the most part, they're looking at what they see in front of them, or what somebody may have said that was in the back seat or something along those lines, and saying, well, this, and this occurred, even though I'm looking at the street and I can see the yaw marks, the skid marks, the physical evidence is as absolute. There's only one way to put those marks on the road, and that's with the tire. And so you can't have done what you said you did and have the car be where it's at and have these kinds of marks. So it was not unusual, and it's not a malicious thing. It was just that you got to, okay, well, here's your statement, and of course the other person has another statement. Then you got the witness. Now, sometimes your witness is just an innocent third party who saw what they saw or what they think they saw, and you get that information down. Sometimes you get a witness that's got an attitude and a bias, for whatever the reasons might be. And so you got to sift through that. And when you're doing it on a civil investigation, this can get to be very involved because you got a lot more time. You're not a cop on the radio trying to get this thing resolved, get the street clear, and get on to the next call. In the civil world, you got 3 to 5 years to do all of this. Well, people's minds change, people lawyer up, evidence becomes available, other investigators and accident people and insurance agents and all the components of a good civil litigation. Or if it's a criminal investigation, a vehicular manslaughter case, handle a lot of those. Everybody's lawyered up, everybody's got something to say, and more importantly, not to say. And so you got to weed through all of that. But with the advent of closed circuit TV, you'd be amazed the effort and the amount of time and money that insurance companies and self-insureds will put in to grab video.
Explain self-insures.
And self-insured is somebody that insures themselves. So all your municipalities and government agencies are self-insured up to
Big companies.
Big companies. A lot of my clients have been construction companies that build freeways and railroads and things like that. So cars into bridge abutments and construction zones, people that crash in construction zones, people that take out the K-rail or they hit the guy that's laying the cones. I've had one of those. There's just a whole variety of different self-insureds out there. Actually, anybody can self-insure if you can post the bond to do it. Yeah, it's not a good idea for an individual, but you can do it. So these guys will generally do their own investigations.
What are the K-bar? What are the concrete barriers?
Of the K-rail?
Yeah.
Yeah. Those can be very unforgiving if you hit them at the wrong angle.
Well, and I've always driven long enough to remember metal that gives.
Yeah.
And I've thought, those are dangerous because if a car hits that, it can be shoved into the other lanes.
Well, yes, but
If it's the old-fashioned thing, it just tears up a lot of
well, potentially, but there's also the issue of cars catapulting and going into the opposing lane of traffic, so you've
Head
got
on,
that. And also glancing, angle attack is such that your cars can go down. You know, it's a compromise because a lot of times you're putting the K-rail in is because no matter what happens on this side of the K-rail, it's better than if it happens on the other side. And so there's that. Now, the K-rail design has changed. You may recall back in the 80s when K-rail started becoming really popular, they had much more of an angle to them.
Yeah.
What they were discovering was that cars would hit those and it would actually catapult them up.
So they hit the base.
Yeah,
and
so they changed the angle on them. So
you mentioned visualization. I even have a dream that I've had several times, and that's I drive a lot, and it's going around a bend, and the concrete barriers on the, maybe 12 feet off the road, and I have this dream that I drift into it. Does that mean I'm driving too fast around the bend?
Well, that. You need to talk to somebody else about that. I will tell you that there's a critical speed for all curves. A great example of this, one of the guys that helped me with traffic on the radio show was Donnie Risden. He's out there at the 76 station on the northbound side of the 101. And they redesigned that whole off-ramp. And it's a 15-mile-an-hour curve there. And that might be too generous, but the deceleration lane that's on there is not that much. So if you come into that curve too hot, you're going to go right through that sign all the way over to the other side. It's inevitable. There's no way you can stop it. So it's going to be curious to see what kind of crashes they have there. They have the same setup at northbound 101 at Hope, where you come off there. They've had numerous crashes there. But there's only so much real estate that Caltrans has to work with there if you're going to have an off-ramp there. So you've got your deceleration lane in that case, and it comes in there, and you got to do that curve at 15, 20 miles an hour. You're not going to make it. 154, the 2200 block at the curve, we call it Arnaldi's curve up there, where Arnaldi's property comes down through the canyon. And you come around that curve too fast, you're going to go right into that guardrail, and it is a 150, 200-foot drop on both sides of that road. People don't realize how steep it is, and that's one of the reasons the guardrail's actually there, because it's a better option than being catapulted over. So, and there isn't a month that goes by that the Caltrans isn't up there replacing that. And it isn't like there isn't ample warning that you're coming into a tight curve there. There's plenty of signage there, and yet people still do it. And so, it's people are people, and I think that's one of the factors that doesn't get considered when we talk about traffic design and engineering and the political influences and attitudes that start plugging into what traffic control has become today, as opposed to how people really do drive and the things that actually do in fact happen.
So the bureaucrats, bad word, in like the city or county, are they trained enough to really be planning traffic patterns?
Well, the people making the decisions aren't, but people that actually do the work are.
They are?
I mean, yeah, oh yeah. There's a guy here in town, I won't mention his name, but he worked at the city of Irvine when I was there, and he was their public works director. And he went on later to go into the Orange County Toll Authority, and he was instrumental in designing the toll roads in Orange County, which is a whole nother story for another day. And now he's up here. And the level of skill that these guys have in engineering and knowing how things work and how they got to where they're at is just phenomenal. But they're not the ones that sign the checks, and they're not the ones that make the political decisions. Somebody else does that. That's being driven by other forces. I watched a newsreel the other day, and it was a video taken of somebody reporting live from Moscow. And in that video were bicycle lanes. And I'm thinking, my God, you can't even get away from it in Moscow. This is being driven by whoever or whatever. I mean, we can speculate all you want, and it's universal. So it's not that there's some guy at some city or some county or up at Caltrans at a desk that's gone AWOL. The traffic engineers know what they're talking about. In fact, Ted and I on Community Alert have interviewed traffic engineers, and they talk about this because we talked about diamond lanes. One of my pet peeves is high occupancy
Diamond
vehicle.
lanes, yeah.
I call them suicide lanes, but what's the value? Well, so he puts out the mathematical formula that shows, okay, well, if you do this and this, you can actually move more cars per hour if you do it. Okay, I'll buy into that. I understand. The same way that trunking works with telephones and radios and stuff. But let's talk about how people really drive. Let's talk about the person that's going to be 55, 10, and 2, and is in the number one suicide lane, tying traffic all the way back to Tustin. And that's what you have. And so how do you combat the realities against the political forces that are there?
I've quoted this, and maybe I usually, as I say, know 5% about everything. There's a study done on diamond lanes that I thought it was in Philadelphia or Pittsburgh, one of those P in the East, that came out to say that diamond lanes cause congestion. They don't speed it up. There are few people in the diamond lane, but everybody who can't get in the diamond lane is shoved into heavy traffic, fender benders,
Yeah.
Is that accurate?
I would think so, based on what I've seen. I didn't work for the Highway Patrol, and the Highway Patrolman might suggest something different, but I drive 30 to 50,000 miles a year all over California. I've been to places folks haven't even heard of, and I can tell you that people jump over those double yellow lines without reservation at speed to get around the slowpoke, and it's just dangerous as can be, and there's just horrific accidents. Good examples of those are 405 down there in Orange County through Westminster, Huntington Beach, down through Costa Mesa. You've got it up here now on the 101 as you come up through into Carpinteria. Now, they have done a fantastic job building all of that down there. You got to admire the quality of the work and construction, but you also have to admire what is it we're trying to do, because it doesn't.
You're talking about the highway from Muscle Shoals.
Yeah, more or less. Yeah.
And the highway that was Montalvo.
Yeah.
I was a young staffer for Lagomarsino when they decided to build that, but they needed a lot of fill.
Right.
And there was a community in Ventura called Montalvo, Little Mountain. Mm-hmm. They took that little mountain down to the level of the rest of
Shaved it off. Yeah.
700 feet, and it was used for the fill for our freeway.
Well, but going back to the accidents, it's the Highway Patrol and the fire department, paramedics have to deal with the ramifications of all of this day in and day out. It's the cops and the firemen and the paramedics that have to pick the bicycles off the road. You're going to be a bicyclist, and you can be absolutely, completely correct in everything you say, think, and do, and be doing everything by the book, and still get run over and killed by an unlicensed, uninsured motorist.
Well,
And
I've been told that bicyclists and motorcyclists are in great danger, not because what they're doing, but that car drivers don't see them because
see 'em.
they. Is that accurate?
Well, yeah, I know you got the blind spot on the right side, right rear of
Yeah.
your car. Not all cars, but a lot of them. The other thing is if you're in a bike or a moped, and the mopeds back in the 80s when
Yeah.
mopeds were a big thing. And ironically, these electric bikes are classified the same as mopeds.
Yeah.
They go up to 30 miles an hour. And mopeds were a huge problem back in the 80s because people were hitting them because they couldn't see them. And they also didn't have the power that a full motorcycle has to pull away. And the people that tend to ride those aren't necessarily paying the same degree of attention that a veteran motorcycle rider would. So there they are passing people on the right and the blind spots when people are getting ready to make right turns. And all you got to
Yeah.
do here locally, State Street's a classic example up in and around Mission. And as you come down through there, people making right turns and all those businesses on the southbound side with bicyclists having to dive for cover. The bike's not doing anything wrong except it's unsafe speed for conditions if you want to get technical about it, but try to explain that to somebody on a bicyclist and not get into a confrontation. It's not worth it to the cops. What's the point? Until there's an accident. And bicyclists can be held responsible for these accidents and are in fact held responsible in many cases. But do they have the insurance and the financial reserves to back up the problems that they can cause, not only for somebody else, but for themselves? That gets us into another pet peeve of mine is head injuries. People that have head injuries have life-altering changes that impact lots of potential people, including their family and themselves, potentially.
You're
And it's
talking
all
about head
avoidable.
injury in the accident
Yeah,
or
you
previous?
get a head injury in a bicycle accident, you slip and fall, pedestrians get hit, what have you. You don't want a head injury, and it's preventable. So that's my mantra, is the prevention aspect of this, not to get on the sandbox about whether or not there should be bicycles or not. Clearly there should be. I've been hit on a car on my bike, and I didn't like it then, and I wouldn't like it now. When I worked out at Foot Patrol, we had bike accidents all the time. I mean, it was a ritual. And yet, I don't think it's probably changed out there since. I mean, the stop signs are useless, riding on the right side of the road, riding on the next to the curb,
Well,
that kind of thing.
I'm trying to learn to break a habit. I look each way for a pedestrian or a bicyclist in a intersection where they have the right of way to cross, and I look right, I look left, and then I start up, and I should have looked back right again.
That's right.
Because it's not right left, it's right left right.
That's right. That's right.
And
It's like
I'm
a
just
drum.
learning that
Yeah.
after a lady twice, or two different ladies, pushing a baby carriage that I almost hit in the intersection. I just.
And you got people,
Luckily, I'm only going 5 miles an hour, but that wouldn't help much at knocking over a carriage.
it's how do you talk about this stuff and not sound like you're a fanatic or a kook or just
It's okay.
disgruntled or what? I know, but how do you talk about it so that people say, I never thought of that. Maybe you got a point. You can be dead right. And I've seen a lot of dead right in my life, and I didn't like it. And I can't say that I can do much about it, but I can share it and say, maybe you ought to think about this before you go racing down the right side of cars. When you get emergency vehicle driving class and you go through the EVOC and what have you, one of the things they stress is never pass on the right. Because what are you supposed to do when you're driving a car and you hear a siren? Pull to the right. Well, what in the world are you doing on the right side of the car? Because that's where the crash is going to be. And you can't help anybody if you don't get there. And there's, of course, all the paperwork and the hassles that go with being in a crash. And I wasn't driving the night that it happened, but I was in an emergency vehicle crash in Westwood, of all places. And it was the guy was passing on the right.
2 questions out of this discussion. I wonder how, I know a motorcycle cop could do it, but people are in the diamond lane and they're breaking the law going in and out. How do the police get them? I mean, are they going to come up behind them, flashing lights, and drive them through all that
No,
stop
because
and go
it's too much risk. It's not
Yeah.
worth the effort. Now, I can't speak for the highway patrol, but I mean, chasing people down, especially motorcycles, is just not a good idea, because even if you're in the right, even if you've got everything on your side as far as your justification, you can't justify hurting or killing somebody over an infraction. It just isn't going to happen. It's just not worth the risk. And if the idea of traffic enforcement is to be safe and promote safety, then why are you doing unsafe things to do it? I
was amazed to find out, old dogs keep learning new tricks, that motorcyclists, I guess if they keep like a 20 or 30 mile an hour speed, can pass on the right, move back and forth through traffic that's stop and go. I get mad as heck. What if my passenger opened the door, that motorcycle?
That's right.
But the law allows that.
Well, because the powers to be in Sacramento are trying to move traffic. I mean, the incentive here is to keep everything moving. And that has been the mantra until recently, bar none. I remember back in the 80s and even in the 90s, if you got involved in a traffic accident and the CHP was the agency that handled it, they'd push your car out of the road. They get that road open as fast as they can. Well, that kind of went away after the lawsuits started coming in from the insurance companies and
So
drivers.
that's the reason, particularly if it's a fatal, that lanes are blocked off with yellow tape for an hour or two.
You're not going to move a fatal until you've gotten all your measurements taken and your photographs. And if it happens at night, they're generally going to wait till the morning before they do that for obvious reasons. And
of course, the highway patrolmen are in a little bit of danger out there at night.
Oh yeah. Highway patrolmen, I mean, you can go to the web, there's several websites about highway patrol fatalities, and you'd be amazed, the vast majority of the people killed are hit by cars. And so that's the same with fire department for that matter, and paramedics getting hit in the middle of the road. And Caltrans workers, any road worker for that matter, and I've handled some fatals with them.
Not safe to be walking on a highway where people are going 80.
There isn't anybody watching this that hasn't had the phone in their hand at some point in time when they're driving and looked up and had that moment. There's nobody that hasn't had that, myself included. And so just imagine if that moment was a pedestrian or a bicyclist or whatever.
Well, obviously, and the law is that you're not supposed to have a cell phone free. Are they just as dangerous if they're plugged in and coming through your speaker?
Well, I think there's arguments that yes, because the human brain can only do certain number of things at a time. I mean, you look at professional drivers, police officers, for example. Now they got computers in the cars, MDTs. So that somebody has decided that the way they want to give you their call is they're going to put it over here. So instead of my eyes being over here at the camera, my eyes are down here. It's the same thing with the new electric cars. The screen to control your car is over here. So it is below the dash line, and it is over here with glare. Just a couple weeks ago, I was up in Washington State, and I drove one of the new electric Ford Mustangs. It is not the Ford Mustang that you and I are familiar with, but it does have a giddy up and go to it. But the whole thing is right here, and it is extremely difficult to be able to look where you're going. In Washington, you talk about a place that has some interesting street design. Seattle is your place.
Yeah.
Down here.
I spent a lot of time up there.
Yeah, I mean, my God, whoever put that together? But in any event, there it is. And I'm surmising, based on back to the Mike in the Morning show, I have this thing here, and it gives me all the CHP data the number of electric cars that were involved in collisions in the morning, and they stopped doing it. This is another thing that I thought was funny, because for a while it was Priuses. There's the dispatchers down there had a thing for Priuses, because they'd actually say Prius versus something. Well, nobody cares what kind of car it is. There's two cars that crashed. I'll figure it out when I get there. Why are you telling me it's a Prius? So there it was. And I'm thinking, why are so many Priuses involved in crashes? And is that any more or less than any of the other vehicles that are out there? And I suspect that's not. It's just somebody was putting that in there. They don't do it now. I've noticed that they stop now. That may just be because of a single individual. But when I start seeing these cars, that the Teslas are the same way, where the screen, all your control functions are over here. Then the other thing is, when I get to Washington and I get in the car and I'm being driven by my friends, and the guy that's driving the car is a thoracic surgeon. We're not talking about a clown here. We're talking about a world-known thoracic surgeon. And he and the other guy in the front seat are arguing over the electronic voice on the map in downtown Seattle. And I'm in the back seat thinking, how is this going to turn out? And it's raining. That's another component to it. And this is just the human condition. This is not what you talk about in the academic environment when you're thinking about all these things that are good ideas.
Tell me it's not old age, but I have a problem being on the phone with someone. I do a lot of my work on the phone when I'm driving. And for instance, I'm going to a certain place, but I've been to other places before that, and all of a sudden I've gone by all of them while I'm talking on the phone.
Yeah, you can't.
And I'm at Haley Street, and I've got to turn around and go way back to Carril Boulevard. Is that my mind, or is that part of the system?
Well, you can only process so much at a time, and if you start focusing in on a conversation that's in depth, you're talking numbers or specifics or contracts or any of that kind of stuff that you'd be talking about. Yeah, you're going to get so focused on that you become what they call is velocitized, and you're just not even paying attention. Have you ever been in a situation where you got home and you don't remember leaving?
Leaving
whatever you were leaving?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Because when I was commuting, I used to live in Tustin and commuted to Los Angeles. When I worked in Los Angeles, I lived in Santa Barbara. It was 90 miles just to get to work. I lived in Riverside for a while when I was working in Irvine. I've traveled all over, and sometimes you get home, you're so tired, you don't remember having left. And so, and you think about that in the world of commercial drivers and people that commute, salesmen, people that are shooting up and down. There are a lot of people in Santa Barbara that don't work here. They're going into other areas.
The arbitrary drunk driving laws, now that I've said that, you can understand where I'm coming from. I think there was a study once that a woman with a baby in the car was less capable to drive than a person who'd had 3 drinks.
Well, I don't know. I mean, you could argue that career professional drinkers at 2.0 are probably safer drunk than they are sober. You could argue that certain career drinkers drinking all the time probably drive better than they do if they were, but that's just justifying unsafe behaviors. You do not in California want to get involved in an injury traffic accident with alcohol in your system. Even if you're not legally drunk, they're going to come after you.
Well, my big fear, because I'm a very cautious older driver, is if I had a couple of drinks or no matter what, I was on a cell phone call that is plugged in, is somebody else hitting me, but I'm in the accident. And now there's all the reports and everything, and I'm terrified about what I've done, even though I didn't cause the accident. How do you avoid that?
Well,
somebody else hitting you.
Well, you can't. In some cases, you can't. I mean, it's just the nature of the beast. I got rear-ended one time on the northbound 101, just coming into town. I just got my car back and got rear-ended by an unlicensed, uninsured driver at bumper-to-bumper traffic because they weren't paying attention. They were on their phone. And it's going to happen to anybody. And that's part of why I share these stories, because anybody can be you. Um, there was a case that I handled. It's probably one of the most sad ones I've handled as a civil investigator. It was it's not King City. It's on the 5. I'll think of it here in a minute. But anyway, this lady's moving back to her parents' house in
Kettleman?
Kettleman, yes, thank you. This lady's moving out of North Hollywood, or Hollywood, and she's going back up to move back in with her parents. Nice lady.
Only 80 mile an hour freeway.
80 miles an hour until it's not. And so the movers, they're in a bobtail truck. They pack up all their stuff and they go off. She's following behind them. And so ultimately she passes them. And she gets involved in a rear-ending accident at about 80, 85 miles an hour, drives right into the back of a semi-truck. Kills her instantly. Ironically, the witness to this is a chief with the highway patrol. He's sitting right next, and there was what the highway patrol calls them posies, but the guys that sit in their cars in construction zones trying to slow people down. He was right in that area as well. So there's some good witnesses to all this. Anyway, she goes flying in there, and then during all the commotion that was going on with this, the truck that was carrying all her furniture drives by, and the guys see her in there, but didn't recognize her as being the one. And if this lady was going to survive, this would have been the crash, because the car right behind her was a cop and a nurse, and they really tried to do their best, and they got a CHP chief right there, but it's just not going to happen. But the truck ends up getting up to the pound, and then of course they want to know where their daughter is. And long story short, they find him. Well, nobody could figure out what caused the accident. Why did this girl just drive into the back of the truck? There's no indications of suicide. There's no mechanical problems with the car and anything like that. And I said, well, she was on the phone. Well, there is no phone. I said, there's got to be a phone. The fact that you don't have it doesn't mean it isn't there. You just have to go find it. So Kettleman City, I drive all the way out to Kettleman City, and I go into the tow yard, and we start looking in this car, and the phone was pink of all colors, was buried in the dashboard and the A post. It had flown out of her hand all the way across into the dashboard and embedded itself down in there. Now the irony was, the reason I kind of knew where it was because I had the photographs that the CHP had taken at the time before they moved the car. That's why these photographs are so important, is despite all the aggravation it causes for people that are waiting in line to get through. Because there was the phone. You could kind of see it. What's that pink thing in the corner of the dashboard? So I go out there and lo and behold, there's the phone. Get a search warrant, get the records for the car phone, and there you got everything you need.
If you're going 80 miles an hour and you stop it instantly, everything in the car still goes
correct.
80 miles an hour. We forget that.
Well, yeah, and that's why having your dog in your car is such a problem. And it's horrible seeing that.
Yeah, even if they're in the back seat and not, but people riding with their dog in their lap, the window down, and the dog with its head out at 35, 40 miles an hour.
One of the guys that gave me grief about this, in an affectionate way of sorts, was my partner from Community Alert, Ted, until he got involved in a head-on collision up on 154 Paradise Road. Now, he was the passenger in the back seat, but he ended up in the front seat on the right front floorboard with his buddy on top of him, deceased, and the dog was up there. And he became a believer. The seat belts work.
Yeah. And I would guess leashes at the dog tied works too.
Yeah, and I have dogs, and the dogs are terrific, and I know they like to ride in the car and stuff, but I only do it when I absolutely have to. Animals and cars don't mix, and it's tragic. And they just had a fatal up here last week with a dog in the cars, the one that's out there on towards Santa Cruz Avenue, and that's out towards Lompoc. So yeah, it's just horrible.
Traffic planning in our area, a group that you and I respect, Cars Are Basic, are preaching against roundabouts, not because they haven't worked in Europe. You know what they're like in Europe. Watch the...
I've been in Europe. I know exactly how they work. Downtown Paris.
Yeah, I watch the French race every June, and I mean, these guys, the roundabouts are 5 acres. And the only one I know that has a lot of space is in the middle of the shopping center in Santa Maria. It has, you know, some,
Well, they're big enough that you can. I was at Pinehurst on a project years ago, and North Carolina has roundabouts, but they're probably in 5 to 10 acre parcels.
Yeah.
And you come into these things at 70, 80 miles an hour, you don't even slow down, and you can get to everywhere you want to go. But this roundabout they have down here in Milpas is too much in too small of an area. And I've talked to bus drivers.
and traffic still backs up a block and a half.
But what about the trash truck? What about the fire truck? What about the buses? What about the delivery trucks? UPS, Federal Express, the Sasso and Giordano's trucks. What about? These vehicles are high profile, they have big turning radiuses, they can't negotiate these things, and several of them are now hopping the curbs. I flat out was told by a bus driver here, they just hop the curbs. Well, let's see what the mechanics seem to think about that. How do you keep the bus in a line? What about the passengers in the bus? You're exposing the district to liability if somebody gets hurt doing that.
A classic is Hot Springs Road in Montecito. The times that 18-wheelers are across it.
Yeah, they can't
stuck.
do it. They can't do it.
Nobody can move.
It's not physically possible, not to mention the fact that somebody from out of town is not anticipating these kinds of obstructions in the course of their normal driving. Now, admittedly, there's more of this craziness going on across the country than there has been in the past. I just was recently in Missouri, and you start seeing this stuff in Missouri, and I go, are you kidding me? Oklahoma, I was in this little town outside of Stillwater, Oklahoma, and they're starting this kind of stuff.
Roundabouts and
Yes, roundabouts and crazy slowing traffic. I mean, how fast are people driving outside of Stillwater,
we
Oklahoma?
have to quit teaching traffic planners.
I'm not entirely sure.
Common sense.
Well, I don't know. You should interview some traffic planners. Is it the traffic planners coming up with this and forcing it on everybody, or is there another agenda going to the traffic planners saying, make this agenda work? Are we trying to take something that's round and putting into it? I'm not so quick to just assume it's the traffic planners.
We are seeing that with zoning and building and coming out of Sacramento, where we're being told that local jurisdictions have to do this.
That's correct.
And so you're saying that happens in traffic.
It certainly must, because telling people that are trained how to make things work, telling them to do something different, goes against their grain. It's against their nature. And so why are these guys doing and building things that you know aren't going to work and that ultimately are going to get torn out? You know some of this stuff's going to go away. When I went to Northwestern, the big thing at the time was crosswalks. Municipal crosswalks were being removed. Now, we're talking 1989 here. And the reason they were taking crosswalks out is because there's no legal reason to have a crosswalk, because there's a presumption that there's a crosswalk invisible that exists at all interchanges, or intersections rather. So anywhere where there's prolongation of a curb line, there's a crosswalk. So why put the lines there? Because if you put the lines there, then you got to maintain the lines. And it also suggests that if the lines are there, the cars are going to stop. But the only thing that really stops at white lines is cattle. You can't get a cow to go across it, but a car certainly will. So they were taking them out for liability reasons. Now, not only are we putting crosswalks back, which are much more elaborate designs, which perhaps they need, we're also putting in unusual traffic control devices that are not consistent with what we've all grown up and around. They're unusual. And the whole idea behind the Uniform Traffic Code, when we had that ultimately grew into what we have statewide, 50 states, was everything needs to be uniform and consistent. Now, no surprises. But now we have devices that, well, which light am I supposed to see? There's a traffic signal up at, I don't know if it's Las Caneros or Stork, one of those two, that give conflicting indications for the same direction of travel.
Yeah.
It's a traffic light, and it's a Caltrans intersection. One's for bikes and one's for cars. But why are the bikes being treated differently than the cars to make the same movement? That's just an invitation for somebody getting hit.
I don't know how Caltrans can improve, but for instance, going into Worthen, they're fixing the road, and it's 55-mile zone, and you look up and here the sign for 65 miles an hour is still on the left. Why don't they take it down if they're, I mean, if they can put in a 55 mile, can't they remove the 65 mile sign?
Well, you would think, but I don't know about that specific thing. Speed limits change from time to time. There's the rule of the 85th percentile, and they come out and do a speed survey and how much they are. 85% of the cars will do such and such a speed, which may be less than the posted speed, potentially, where generally it's quite a bit more. If you have a 25 mile an hour posted speed zone, you might see cars doing 33 to 35, something like that in there, depending on circumstances.
So if we're in an accident, multi-car stuff, and we see you walking in, we should worry.
No, no, actually, no one's going to see me or any of my ilk. We're behind the scenes and we're dealing with things after the fact. Your vast majority of traffic accident guys that are showing up, your average generic traffic accident, are not looking for this kind of stuff. It's the more advanced investigations.
I'm only going to give you 2 minutes to answer a question of something that really bugs me. You're in a parking lot. You're backing out. You're watching and everything, and somebody comes along in the drive lane at 35 miles an hour and hits you. You're at fault for backing into
unsafe
them.
backing.
Why?
Well, you got an advantage if you're on private property because they can't cite you on private property
Right.
unless the parking lot's been commissioned, like
But the
Marketplace.
insurance company will ding
Yeah.
you.
Well, they will and they won't. I mean, you can have accidents and they won't necessarily increase your rates because everybody's been in a parking lot and understands this kind of thing. The other thing is that in the civil world, it's preponderance of evidence, not beyond reasonable
That's
doubt.
true, yeah.
And preponderance of evidence is a whole nother world. And it's really who comes in with the wheelbarrow with the most experts.
Did you have a certain way you concluded your Mike in the Morning show? Any last 30 seconds?
Yeah, we just did the call sign, Santa Barbara, California. The news is next. We'll see you tomorrow. That's pretty straightforward.
You didn't say drive carefully?
No. I don't like people telling me that, and I'm not going to be the one that does it either. You listen to some of these traffic reports and do this and do that, and you should this and you should that. We all know that. We don't need to be told that. So I come up with something different.
Is 1 minute, is sleep deprivation we know how bad it is with truck drivers
Huge
falling
problem.
asleep. Is it a problem with average person on the
Absolutely, absolutely. And as somebody that worked graveyards and long hours, I can tell you, I have had it. I'm sure you've had it. Anybody that's been around in the shift work has had it. It's extremely prevalent.
Smoke a cigar because you're not going to drop that in your lap. You're not going to go to sleep.
Well, I don't know, but sleep deprivation is a problem in all aspects of our lives. And I don't think many of us are getting proper sleep anyway for a variety of different reasons. But no sleep and driving, you got to stop. That's what those rest stops are for.
Well, Mr. Williams,
Thank you, sir.
thank you. It's
Thank
been
you.
a great show.
Been interesting.